What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 8 preview where I'm going to answer a bunch of your questions to hopefully help you with your decisions as we get closer to that Game Week 8 deadline. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. So let's start with cheap forwards because a few people asked about them. So who are the best forwards under 6.5 million in your opinion? Raul Jimenez, Delap, Vardy, Calvert-Lewin, Wood or Cunha? Now, I've put them in order of who I think is best to worst. As always with these kind of lists, it's not like there's massive gaps between these players and the person in 8th place is absolutely terrible or anything like that, but there has to be some kind of order. I've also added in Danny Welbeck, who I think should be considered while João Pedro is out, and Evan Nielsen from Bournemouth as well. So this is the order I've gone for. So Chris Wood is the best option, then Calvert-Lewin, then Cunha, then Raul Jimenez, then Welbeck, then Delap, then Evan Nielsen, and then Vardy in last place. Again, like I straight away, I think, is it a bit harsh having Vardy in last place out of all these players, especially with the next 3 fixtures? Maybe it is a little bit, because they do have Southampton away in 8, then Forest at home in 9, and Ipswich away in 10. So short term, I really like Jamie Vardy, but then it's Man United away in 11, then Chelsea at home in 12. And deep down, the thing that's making it difficult for me to put him higher up is just the age factor. He may well go and play every single game this season. It wouldn't completely surprise me, but he is a bit older than most of these other players on the list. I think at some point, will that catch up with him? Will he just get like a small knock at some point that makes him miss games? Possibly. It's not like other players on this list can't get injured as well, but that is part of the reason why he's so low down. Just going to the other end of the list, I just think Chris Wood's record, especially under Nuno, since he's come to Nottingham Forest, has been really good. He's already scored 4 goals this season. He's on penalties, as we saw. He took the penalty ahead of Gibbs-White, however many game weeks ago that was now. And if you look at the fixtures, you've got Palace at home this week, then Leicester away, West Ham at home in 10, Newcastle at home in 11. So 3 home games in the next 4. Forest do then run into Arsenal away in 12, which is not great. But then it's Ipswich at home in 13. So I think you just look at the Arsenal game and think, okay, it's a bit annoying to have that in that next little run, but the rest of the fixtures are so good, you kind of just deal with it. So I think Chris Wood from game weeks 8 to 13 looks decent. It is worth saying that after Ipswich in 13, it's then City away and Man United away. So between 12 and 15, it's 3 away games against Arsenal, Man City, Man United. So probably after game week 13, Ipswich at home, you might want an exit strategy for Chris Wood. And I think that's worth considering when you're buying a cheap forward is how long do you want to have them for, because it's not necessarily a position you want to keep messing around with. With the next 2 players, Calvert-Lewin and Cunha, I think Cunha right now is being talked about a lot more, partly because Calvert-Lewin is blanked for the last 3 game weeks. And I think from game week 10 onwards, Cunha is a great option. I just think because of the next 2 fixtures, I'd still slightly prefer to buy Calvert-Lewin if I was going in game week 8. If this is just something you're considering for the next few weeks, then maybe you go for Cunha instead and spend that extra money. But I think when you look at the next 2 fixtures, the fact that Wolves have to play Man City at home this week, it's not ideal. And then it's Brighton away. From 10 onwards, great. Palace at home, Southampton at home, Fulham away, Bournemouth at home, Everton away, West Ham away, Ipswich at home, Leicester away. The fixtures are incredible from 10 to 17. And if you really want to go long term with this position and you need to buy a player this week, I don't completely hate buying Cunha, but he does have to play Man City at home, Brighton away straight away, which is not ideal. Whereas for Calvert-Lewin, he's 0.5 million less, and you've got Ipswich away, Fulham at home, Southampton away, next 3. Then even after that, it's West Ham away, Brentford at home, Man United away, Wolves at home. So Man United away is probably the trickiest fixture on paper from now until game week 14. So in terms of the overall run, I think Everton's fixtures, they're not as good as Wolves from 10, but from now until like 14, I think they're fine. And also you save money by going for Calvert-Lewin, which can be used elsewhere. So I know he's blanked 3 times in a row, and he's only got 2 goals, 1 assist so far this season. But I don't think he's as bad an option as people are making out. So that's why I would have Calvert-Lewin ahead of Cunha. But like I said, the run that Wolves have from 10 to 17 is amazing. If you've got the money, Cunha is still a good option to bring in. Raul Jimenez, I put in 4th place. I like him. He's not on penalties. We think it's going to be Andreas Pereira instead. And I think there's a question about him later on. But he's only 5.6 million. And I quite like the next 5 fixtures for Fulham. So you've got Villa at home, Everton away, Brentford at home, Palace away, Wolves at home, which is pretty good. After that, it does get tricky. So Spurs away, Brighton at home, Arsenal at home, Liverpool away. So again, after 5 game weeks, you might want an exit strategy for Raul Jimenez. But if you've got a setup where you've got 8 attackers and a decent midfielder or something that you can play instead, you wouldn't necessarily need to get rid of him straight away or anything like that. He's in a really good run of form. It's 3 goals, 1 assist in the last 4 games. The only reason I can't put him higher, even though he's playing well and so are Fulham, I just think if there's any dip in form and Muniz keeps doing all right off the bench, that could just change. We saw how quickly Muniz got dropped. Raul Jimenez, if he goes for a little bit of a blank spell, the same could happen to him as well. Whereas I think with Cunha, Calvert-Lewin and Chris Wood, you don't really have those concerns. Even when Muniz played recently, it's been with Chris Wood. So although Chris Wood gets subbed early quite a lot, I expect him to be in the starting 11 going forward. I think with Raul Jimenez, I'd have slightly more concerns. I guess if Chris Wood went through a bad patch, maybe Nuno would change it. But he's done so well in general, I think there's less risk of that than there is with Raul Jimenez. Danny Welbeck is quite high up the list, but that really is if you're only going for a short-term pick, because I think ultimately he's in one of the strongest teams of these forwards we're looking to buy, for that price, what I'm trying to say. And the next 2 fixtures are pretty good. Newcastle away, Wolves at home. And from 12 onwards, it's good as well. But then it's Liverpool away and City at home in 10 and 11. So Danny Welbeck for me would really be a really short-term option because he's on penalties, he's playing for Brighton, and the next 2 fixtures are good. But I think it's quite difficult to make a case to buy him right now because from 12 onwards, who knows if João Pedro will be back. And if he is, Danny Welbeck would lose penalties and he'd probably lose minutes as well. So I might, looking at it now, I might have Danny Welbeck a little bit too high up the list because of Liverpool and City. But I think in terms of team strength, Danny Welbeck's in one of the best teams on this list. I think Delap is in a pretty good run of form. I like his price as well. I think Ipswich may be a little bit stronger than Leicester overall, especially in attack, although there's probably not a huge amount in it. And I just like the next few fixtures. Everton at home, Brentford away, Leicester at home. But after that, again, it gets pretty tricky. It's Spurs away, Man United at home, Forest away. So if you can spend a bit more money on like a Chris Wood, a Cunha or a Calvert-Lewin, I would definitely buy them over Delap. Because personally, I think for this position, it's not one you want to keep messing around with. You just want to put it in and then spend your transfers elsewhere. So I've got Delap then, and then it's Evan-Nielsen after that. He keeps getting subbed early. He's not going to be a 90-minute man by the looks of it. Bournemouth, again, pretty strong team, but they've literally got Arsenal at home, Villa away, Man City at home next 3. And even after that, it's another away game against Brentford. So I don't particularly like their fixtures. And again, looking at it now, even with concerns long-term about Jamie Vardy's fitness and stuff like that, I actually don't think I could buy Evan-Nielsen ahead of Vardy. So I'd actually switch those 2 around. And I'd probably put Delap ahead of Welbeck just because of the fixtures they've got coming up. So I'm happy to move things around a little bit. But I think it's pretty clear who the top 3 are for me. That's Chris Wood, Calvert-Lewin, Cunha. That is who I'd be buying this week if I had the cash for it. So is it better to rotate your premium players or your enablers? Now, the general answer this season is probably going to be your premium players because it's much more difficult to fit them all into the same squad. Last year, Palmer started, I think, 5 million. Saka was 8.5. Haaland was only 13. So to fit those 3 plus Salah into your squad was quite easy. That's not the case this season. But it is going to depend on what stage of the season we're in. So right now, it's very easy to say you definitely rotate your premium players because as we know, Saka's got Bournemouth away this week, which is fine as long as he's available. But then it's Liverpool at home, Newcastle away, Chelsea away, bit more difficult. Same with Cole Palmer, right? Brilliant so far this season, but it's Liverpool away, Newcastle at home, Man United away, Arsenal at home. Now, holding Saka or Palmer the whole way through is absolutely fine. But if you've got spare transfers, you might want to bring in Son if he's available because he's got 3 home games in the next 4, and they're West Ham, Villa and Ipswich. And the away game is Crystal Palace. So at this point of the season, it might be worth moving premiums around. Similarly, as I discussed yesterday, Salah has got Chelsea at home, Arsenal away, whereas Haaland's got Wolves away, Southampton at home next 2. But fast forward to, say, game week 12, if you've got Cole Palmer in your team, the fixtures for Chelsea from kind of game week 12 for ages, basically, are brilliant, right? It's Leicester away, Villa at home, Southampton away, Spurs away, Brentford at home, Everton away, Fulham at home, Ipswich away. The good fixtures continue after that, apart from probably Man City away in game week 23, which is ages away. So at that point, you're probably just putting Palmer in, then leaving him until possibly there's an injury or a suspension or something like that. So there's going to be no need to rotate him. Similar with Saka, whether you hold him the whole way through or bring him back in, the fixtures from game week 12 onwards for Arsenal are pretty good. Forest at home, West Ham away, Man United at home, Fulham away, Everton at home, Palace away, Ipswich at home, etc. I'm not going to read the whole list, but at that point, you're probably not looking to rotate. And again, with Haaland and Salah, you'll make that decision over the next few weeks, and then it will just stick. So Man City's fixtures from kind of game week 10, I don't know, to about maybe 15, 16, 17, they're not as good as they have been. They're not awful either. So you're going to make that decision around game week 10. You're either keeping Haaland the whole way through, or you're taking him out. And if you take him out, you're probably not going to bring him back in until kind of game week 18 onwards. So there is still going to be a bit of premium swapping after the next couple of game weeks, but it's going to be less so, I would say, from game week 12 onwards. Because once you've got Palmer sticking, once you've got Saka sticking, whatever decision you make, and whether you go for Harden or not, once that decision's been made, you're not going to be looking to change it all the time. So I think at the moment, and generally over the season, you're going to want to switch premiums because that's where you get your big captaincy hauls, that's where you get your double-digit scores and stuff like that. But there will be times when you're just happy with them and you swap the other players in your squad instead. So right now, I think there is going to be a bit of premium swapping. That would be less so once we hit kind of game week 12 onwards. So this is a good follow-on question, which I've kind of already answered, but I'm going to go through anyway. Which premium would you prefer from game weeks 9 to 11, Son or Palmer? So you're skipping game week 8 in this case. I think because of that, I would probably just go for Palmer. Like, it's not ideal that he has to play Arsenal at home or Man United away, but you skip the Liverpool away fixture. Game week 9 against Newcastle at home is fine. You probably wouldn't be too worried about playing him against Man United away. And like I've already said, from game week 12 onwards, you're almost certainly going to want Palmer in your squad. I don't think you can say the same thing about Son. If I had to guess who's going to get more points if Son is fit and available between 9 and 11, I probably would go for Son. It's just whether or not it's worth that extra transfer. Like, if you're bringing someone in for game week 9, do you go for Newcastle at home or Palace away? You probably take Palmer. And yes, Son's got to play Ipswich at home in 11, but then it's City away in 12. So you're definitely going to want to make that move later on. So is bringing in Son and then bringing in Palmer worth it? I'm not so sure. If it was game weeks 8 to 11, where you get an extra good fixture out of Son with West Ham at home versus Liverpool away, I probably would just go for Son and then spend that transfer later. But one game week can make a bit of a difference. And I think if I was buying in game week 9, I would just go for Palmer. Obvious caveats if you're buying this week. Son is still orange flag, 25% chance of playing with a hamstring issue, but he's already missed game week 6 and 7 and had 2 weeks off after the international break. So I think he will be available for game week 8. And Ange Postecoglou is quite open as well and should tell us if he's available. So if I was buying for 8 to 11, I think I definitely prefer Son. For 9 to 11, I still think Son is more likely to score more points than Palmer, but not enough where I think it's worth necessarily spending that extra transfer, especially when you're definitely going to want Palmer from game week 12. The other thing to take into account as well, I guess, is possible price changes, because Palmer's already gone up to 10.8, but I think if I look at the price changes on Hub, yeah, Palmer's like 24.15% towards another rise in price. So it's probably not going to happen that soon, unless he absolutely smashes it against Liverpool and gets like 2 or 3 returns. But that's probably quite unlikely to happen. So I think in terms of him suddenly going up to 11 million by the time you want to bring him in, it's not a super high chance of happening. But if he does well against Newcastle, by the time you get to 12, he could be 11 million. And that wouldn't necessarily mean that he's not worth bringing in, but it might mean that you're struggling a bit more to get him in because you haven't made money elsewhere. But I think in general, the price change thing wouldn't massively play into my decision. So 9 to 11, I'd prefer Son, but I'd probably buy Palmer. 8 to 11, I'd probably go for Son and use the extra transfer. So with Alisson ruled out until late November and Liverpool's fixtures getting tougher, is it time to get rid of Trent? I think this depends what your thoughts were before the injury. So if you were already considering getting rid of Trent and you're on the fence about it, then yeah, maybe Alisson's injury is enough to tip you into actually selling Trent. But if originally you were thinking of keeping him the whole way through, I don't know if Alisson's injury would now make me think I've got to get rid of him. Because yes, Liverpool will be weaker without Alisson, but Kelleher is a really good backup that's more than capable of doing well. He's not as good as Alisson, right? Not many goalkeepers are, but he will still do well in that Liverpool team. And I don't think they're weakened so much that Trent now becomes a must-sell, because we already knew the fixtures before this injury. Also, I don't know if he will be out until late November. I guess it depends what you class as late. At the moment in FPL, he's flagged as a hamstring injury, 25% chance of playing. We'll hear from Slot again on Friday. I think the latest thing going around on social media was that he'd be out until after the next international break. So basically, he'd be back for game week 12 onwards, which would be Southampton away, followed by Man City at home, Newcastle away, Everton away. To be fair, that run doesn't look that good. But as I go back to what I just said, we already knew what the fixtures were before this injury, and a lot of people were saying they were going to keep hold of Trent. So I think Trent's attacking potential, the fact that he's got 3 home games in the next 4, albeit against Chelsea, Brighton and Villa, means he's still not a bad option to hold on to. But if you were on the fence about it already, then yeah, maybe this is enough to make you actually sell him. Like for me, for example, I've talked a lot about the fact of if I want to keep Haaland and Saka and I want to do Bruno to Palmer, which I probably will want to do at some point, then Trent will have to go. So I suspect this Alisson news will push me more towards doing that. But it's probably not going to be this week because I just don't need to make the move now. But it'll be something I consider from game week 9 once we got more info about how long Alisson might be out for. So I think it makes Liverpool a little bit weaker, but they're still going to be one of the best defences in the league. Trent is still going to be one of the most attacking defenders. I wouldn't suddenly switch your opinion massively to now have to sell him. But if you want to get rid of him, the fixture run in general is not that great, and I think it's fine. So what are your thoughts on Andreas Pereira? Will he be the one to own from Fulham if Smith Rowe is no longer nailed? Now, I mentioned Smith Rowe in a video last week. We obviously can't say that he's a nailed-on player now because he's literally just missed a game and it wasn't fitness-related or anything like that. But I do think he will start the majority of matches. I think that was a particular setup to combat Man City. And I think Smith Rowe will be straight back in the team this week. And as I've already mentioned with Raul Jimenez, the next 5 fixtures are pretty good. So if you've got Smith Rowe, I think he's a pretty easy hold. I wouldn't be looking to sell him. Would I buy him right now? I guess that is a little bit trickier given that he's just missed a game. But I am pretty confident that he will come in. I think he probably is a little bit better than Andreas Pereira. The thing with Andreas, he's got penalties, right? And he's only 5.3 million. So he is potentially a really nice value player. He didn't take the last penalty, but Marco Silva confirmed that he is their penalty taker essentially ahead of Raul Jimenez. But he's not the same player as he was last year. Like last year, he got a lot of 80 to 90 minutes in most matches. You can see the last 3 games, 66, 68, 64. So if we were getting 90 minutes every week for 5.3 million on penalties, I probably would prefer Andreas Pereira to Smith Rowe. But I think going forward, Smith Rowe's got a chance at better minutes. And has obviously been quite attacking as we've seen already. And the fixtures, well, I mean, the fixtures are the same for both of them, right? But I think there's a good potential for Smith Rowe to be getting points. So I get why people might be a bit more worried about buying Smith Rowe right now. And if I'm honest, could I see myself buying him after just missing a game? Possibly not. But I am fairly confident he will play and be better than Andreas Pereira. But I think in his own right, Andreas Pereira is a nice value option out of 5.3. On penalties, he's just not going to get as many minutes from what we've seen so far as he did last season. So is Savinho worth a hold for the next 2 great Man City fixtures? The honest answer is I just don't know. And this is the problem with Man City players. It feels like you get trapped with them because as you've mentioned, the next 2 fixtures are great, especially for an attacker. Wolves away, Southampton at home. How can you sell a player before they have those 2 fixtures? But on the flip side, will he even start? Because he hasn't started the last 2 Premier League games. He's only started the Champions League game in between. And I think the main worry for me would be Pep started the season with Savinho right wing and then Doku on the left. And obviously Grealish has played there as well. And it's like he wanted to go for kind of out-and-out wingers. Like we know Foden can play there. We know that Bernardo Silva can play on the right as well. But they're not the same type of winger as a Savinho. So it felt like that is the kind of setup that he was going for. But then in the last 2 games, if you look at this one against Newcastle, it is Bernardo Silva on the right and Grealish on the left. And if you look at the game against Fulham, it was a slightly different setup. Again, Grealish on the left, Bernardo Silva on the right. So the fact that he's kind of reverted to type, he's put Foden central and Bernardo Silva on the right, because Bernardo has to play, right? He's just that good. Makes me question whether Savinho will even start the next game. Like you might look at it and say, well, Wolves away and Southampton home is a bit easier than Newcastle away, for example, so there's a good chance he comes back in. But then it means that someone centrally has to miss out, because Bernardo Silva will play. So maybe Gundogan drops out or goes deeper and Kovacic drops out and Bernardo plays alongside Foden. It gets even more tricky, by the way, if De Bruyne's back, because then you've got De Bruyne, Foden and Bernardo Silva to fit in. And maybe it's just that one of them gets benched, right? Maybe it's De Bruyne because he's just back from injury. Maybe it's Foden, who knows? But this is just the problem you have with Man City. And like, I never have a good answer for this because I just do not know if he's going to start. That's the honest answer. So part of me thinks you can't get rid of him. The fixtures are too good. The other part of me thinks just put yourself out of this headache and just buy someone that you know is going to start. Like if you've got a transfer and it's not for a hit, I think Savinho to Brennan Johnson is just not a bad move. You got 4 really good fixtures coming up for Spurs. The next 2 aren't quite as good as Man City, but they're not terrible. And at least you know that Brennan Johnson will start. If you haven't got Mbeumo and you've got money to go and buy him, I would just go and buy him and get it done. Because really, you're relying on him doing really well in these next 2 fixtures. And there's no guarantee he even starts one of them. And he could get benched for both. Like, if I had to guess, I would say he doesn't start Wolves and start Southampton. And that might be enough to keep hold of him. And if it's for a hit, I would just hold him and hope for the best. But if you've got the spare transfer, I honestly think you just put yourself out of this headache. At least that's how I would find it. I would find it headache-inducing. So is Carvalho from Brentford an option alongside Mbeumo? Now, Carvalho is 4.8 million, I believe. Yeah, 4.8. The simple answer to this question would be, I'd probably rather buy Dibbling from Southampton for less money, who's probably got slightly better minutes as well. Like, he's 4.6 million. He's played 90 in the last game, 75 before that, 81 against Ipswich in game week 5, and 62 against Man United in game week 4, which is when he first got into the 11. Now, I can't guarantee that he's going to be in the 11 forevermore, but he is clearly a talented player and has done well enough to play the last 4 games. I think you've got Leicester at home in 8, Everton at home in 10. Most of the time he's going to be on your bench anyway. I'd probably just save the money. With Carvalho, you've got a player in a stronger team, but that also probably has a little bit more in terms of squad depth, players that can just play in his position instead. And that is why he got benched against Wolves in game week 7. Yes, he played 86 and 84 minutes against Spurs away and West Ham at home in 5 and 6. But that's the only 2 starts he's had all season. So there's just no guarantee that he's going to be in the team week to week. And I just think I would rather take the probable better minutes of Dibbling and the slightly cheaper price than going for Carvalho in the stronger team. If you think that Carvalho is going to go and start the next start 5 of the next 6 games or something like that, he's probably worth going for because Brentford's fixtures are so good. But I just don't know if that's a guarantee. And I think if you're spending this little money on the midfielder, it's probably someone that's going to be sat on your bench most of the time anyway. So is he an option? I think because of the price, yes. But I'd rather just go for Dibbling, I think. So would you go for Heung-min Son or Brennan Johnson for the next 4 game weeks? Ignore the price difference as it's Palmer's spot in game week 12. So whichever Spurs player you bring in, you're leaving the money to get Palmer. I get that. I think it's got to be Son. I think Brennan Johnson is a great option. I've spoken about him a lot over the last week or so. I think if you want to bring him in, you absolutely should. At 6.6 million, he's a great price, decent goal threat, in good form as well. I think he's a really good option. But if Ange Postecoglou says that Son is fit and available, he's got to be the one. He's played 90 minutes in every game he's been available for so far. There's a chance he's on penalties as well. So possible penalties. I would say as good a goal threat pretty much as Brennan Johnson, better finisher as well. And his minutes tend to be better too. And he's guaranteed to start. I think Brennan Johnson pretty much is at the moment as well. But Son is absolutely guaranteed if he's fit and available. So let's see what Ange says. If there's any doubts whatsoever about Son's fitness or the chance of him being in the 11 in game week 8, I would just go for Brennan. But if he seems to be fine, I think it's got to be Son. Like, Brennan Johnson is great, but if the price doesn't matter, I would just spend the money on Son. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. I'll be back tomorrow in my team selection video and final thoughts on Friday. If you listened on podcast and got all this way, make sure you rate 5 stars as well. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.